to another episode of Behind the Scenes of S2J'S. Today we will be making pecan brittle. The ingredients that I have already measured out is 2 cups of sugar, 3/4 a cup of corn syrup, 2 cups of toasted pecans, which I salted and toasted before, and 7 tablespoons of butter, which I do 8 tablespoons actually, but 7 in here, and then an extra one for the pan, so that we can make sure that the pan is nice and greased. And then we have 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, a teaspoon and a half of baking soda. First is put the butter inside of the pan and then put it inside the oven, so that way it can melt and and grease the pan nicely, so that way when our pecan brittle comes out, it's easy to take out the pan. It's not sticking to the sides or anything like that. I also lined it with foil to make it a little easier to come out. So the first thing that we're going to do is add the corn syrup to the pot. Now I do the corn syrup and the sugar before I add it to the heat, so that way it doesn't burn, because if you put your sugar in when your pan is hot, your sugar will start to melt and crystallize, and then it will make for a gritty brittle. So I used these plastic wrap bags to make it an easier cleanup for the corn syrup. So you just tear the side, just a little hole like that, tear the side and then pour it into the pot. See how it's so much easier than trying to scrape a cup or something like that, because corn syrup is really sticky and gets everywhere. So that, and then add the 2 cups of sugar. And then I'm gonna go and put it onto the stove, which is like at a medium heat. And then I kind of let that kind of sit for a little bit to kind of warm up and everything like that. And also by my stove, I keep water and a pastry brush. I think this is more so like a grill brush, but they both work the same. And I use this to dip the brush into the water and kind of get the sugar off the sides of the bowl. So that way you don't have any crystallization on the sides, which gets into your pecan brittle. So my butter is melting, my sugar is heating up, the pecans are already toasted, so we don't have to worry about that. With the sugar mixture, you want to get it to a certain heat before you add anything else. So the recipe says that you let it get to 280. So I don't use my thermometer, but you can kind of tell, like, the color of the corn syrup will change. So like right now, if you look, and when we mix it, it's kind of grainy, and you can still see the sugar separated from the corn syrup and everything like that. But once it starts to melt some more, it'll start to seep in and start to turn to like a yellowish type of color. Not quite rust or sunshine, but it'll be somewhere in the middle. So I'm gonna take my pan out and make sure that the grease is, or that the butter is getting all over it. So that's nice and melted. Spread it around your pan like that. Make sure you get it on the edges because it'll boil up. Once you add your baking soda into the pecan brittle, it will bubble up, so you want to make sure that you have a pan that's deep that'll hold the sides, because you don't want it to all spread out. I chose this recipe because it shows the science behind baking. So like the chemistry of it, it's like you see the measurements and everything like that, but it's pretty cool to see the science behind it, with the way that the sugar will bubble when you add the butter, or that the color change when you add the vanilla extract, or how it's saying that it bubbles up when you add the baking soda. It kind of adds an extra interest of baking, or just a science to the kitchen. So I think this is a pretty cool, kind of like a kitchen experiment. I'm going to add my salt into the sugar mixer now, and then just make sure it's in there evenly. And this is when I would do the water along the sides, and you don't really have to like measure it or anything like that. Like I just filled this up with water and I dip my brush and then just go along the sides of the pan. You don't have to worry about like, oh, that's too much water that's going to get into my mixture, because the temperature of the sugar is going to get so hot all the water will cook out of it. So you don't have to worry about adding too much water. I mean, don't pour the water in there, still use the brush and just go along the sides, but you really only have to do this one time just to make sure that all of the sugar is melted down. This is like, I guess, the stage 2 of it is when everything is kind of liquefied. And so now you kind of just want to wait for it to get the color and to melt the sugar down some more. You don't have to stir it as much as if you were having to stir something that you had to keep your eye on, like if you were making caramel or something like that. So the sugar is starting to break down just a little bit more. It's starting to not really boil, but it's starting to bubble, which so I stir it to make sure that there's nothing sticking to the bottom of the pan. To make sure that I don't have any clumps or any burnt part or anything like that. So you just make sure you scrape the sides and scrape the bottom. At this point, you really don't need the water anymore because all the sugar has broken down. This is the part where I was saying that you want to wait for it to get its color and everything like that. And then you're going to add in the butter and the pecans. Depending on how high you have your heat, it'll cook a little faster or a little slower. I have mine at a medium heat so that way it doesn't go too fast. So I'm going to bring my butter and my pecans over here, because when you add in your butter, because it's such a high heat, your butter immediately starts to melt, and it'll start to create a smoke type of thing, kind of like when you pour hot tea or hot water from your tea kettle into your cup and you see the steam come up, it'll kind of do that same thing. So you kind of want to make sure everything is close, so that way you don't have to add your butter and then, or you have to go and get your butter and then add your pecans and all that type of stuff like that. It's just all in one location. And I really love this recipe because it's like a perfect recipe for you to be able to give to family members or have at parties and stuff like that for the holidays, or even just a gathering. You can kind of set it out and let people nibble, kind of like chips or something like that, but it's something that's sweeter, has a little crunch to it. So this is what I was saying, like, I don't know if you can tell, but it's changed colors from the pure white, so it's getting like a little tan kind of color. So you want it to get like that, but kind of like a little bit darker. So I'm gonna leave it on for a couple more minutes just to kind of get it to get that caramel type of color, that golden brown type of color that you want on your brittle. So it's not as dark as your pecans, but it also has some color to it, which gives it that sweet type of flavor. I like to let mine sit for about 30 minutes, so that way I make sure, because I don't want the middle to, the outside to be done, but the middle still hot. So let it sit and cool. Once it's cool, you're going to flip it onto another pan, which is just lined with foil. There's no butter on this one. You don't need the butter because you're not cooking anything, so nothing's going to stick to this. So you flip it, and then I have a lemon juicer that I use because it's heavy. So I use this to break it. Put plastic wrap on top of the brittle if you don't want it, if you want to make sure it doesn't make a mess and everything like that, and then just kind of go around and hit it and break it. You can do, this is the finished product. You can do large pieces of brittle, or you can break it down into smaller pieces. It's kind of whatever you want. You can tell inside of the pieces, you see the airiness that's in there, the bubbles. That's from the baking soda, which makes it bubble and gives it that nice crunch. And then the color, the extra color that I was telling you, comes from the vanilla extract. And then how I made sure I'm stirred the pecans around to make sure that every single bite has some pecan inside of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and try a piece, small piece, but it's still good. It's very crunchy. It has a nice sweet texture, but also salty from the pecans. If you're a person who really likes nuts, this is a really good recipe because it gives you that sweet and that salty. It also gives you that texture of the pecans and everything like that. You have that in every bite. Thank you for watching another episode of Behind the Scenes with S2J'S. My name is Autumn, and I'll see you next time.